Hello, you're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. I'm your host, Bill Sherman. Organizations often have a deep history of research and innovation, whether that's decades or even centuries long. And yet, you can't rely on insights from the past to drive you into the future. Today, I'm pleased to sit down with Mel Huet. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Serta Simmons Bedding Company. In this episode, I'm eager to talk to Mel Huet about the intersection of thought leadership and the marketing function. We'll also explore how listening to customers leads to insights and opportunities for thought leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the podcast, Mel.
Thank you.
You're with Serta Simmons Bedding Company, and that's a company that has a really long history going back into the 19th century. If you can, talk a little bit about Serta Simmons and the history of innovation, because I know it prides itself on innovation.
Yes, this company has such a rich history and innovation. We could probably talk about it for hours. A few things to point out is that Simmons and Serta have been leaders in the industry since inception, and they have actually delivered some of the biggest innovations we've seen in bedding and in sleep. So, for example, moving into an individually wrapped coil where now the bed actually provides what we call the do not disturb. So the fact that you can lay down and the other side of the bed doesn't move like a trampoline. That was a huge innovation that Serta Simmons brought to market. And since then, the company has continued to bring things to market. So when we think about what we're good at, really what the company prides itself on is its rich heritage and innovation.
So you're serving on the senior leadership team as Chief Marketing Officer, and you've been in that role how long now?
2 years, Bill.
Okay, yeah. So I think you shared with me there's been a transformation, and you've shared some of that story. How do you take a company that has been around in various forms for over a century, almost a century and a half now, and start bringing it into new forms of telling stories and engaging with customers and partners in new ways? Talk a little bit about that transformation.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous journey and a lot of learning for myself personally and growth. And when you think about how to drive a transformation, a couple of things that I've learned in this job is one of the first things you have to do is you have to understand the culture that you're operating in. So there's a period of learning and listening and just understanding where you are. And during that time, it's really important to build trust. So making sure that the people that you're working with understand what your motivations are and they feel like they've been heard. And once that trust foundation is there, then you can start to bring in all the elements of a transformation. So here's the place where we're going to disrupt. Here's how we're going to act differently. Here's how we're going to behave. And I have found that specifically at this company, people are really willing to follow as long as they understand where you're going. So an important part is to communicate, where are we headed, and then help them understand what is their role in delivering the transformation. And then you can actually move pretty quickly.
Well, and I think this is one of the places where thought leadership connects is there's a responsibility when you see a vision for the future to share that back and make it accessible first with your own internal team so they understand where are you going, how is this changing, but also how does it relate to who we've been before? And
Mhm.
I want to ask you about an example of that. So I know that one of the projects that you sort of were instrumental in was recognizing there was a need in the market for young buyers looking for their first bed. Talk about that process and that transformation process within the organization, and then how that led to product and also telling that story to a new audience.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So we realized that the Simmons brand was virtually unused. In fact, it was just on some promotional product because we had separated Simmons from Beautyrest several years prior because consumers get confused. Serta, Simmons, Sealy, all the
Right,
S's.
right.
And so
Yeah.
we said, Beautyrest is Beautyrest. And that's a
Mhm.
little bit easier to remember. So Simmons brand is sitting out there And we understood there was an untapped white space in the market, that nobody was really going after this first purchase, this first bed, the young consumer entering the marketplace with not a lot of disposable income. And so we said, okay, this is an opportunity for us. So we were the first company to have a variety of Gen Z insights. We took those consumer insights and understood that what they wanted was a hassle-free crash pad. So just a place to crash, and also a place to surf and watch movies and do the other things that are part of their lifestyle, because most of them either live in some type of bedroom or apartment or small space. And from there, I walked into the boardroom with a lot of men in their 50s to 70s and said, we're going to launch Simmons on TikTok. So 150-year-old brand. And they're like, what's TikTok? And it's going to be Gen Z, and it's going to be completely different. And I showed them the advertising and the look and the feel. And I think they thought it was the craziest thing they'd ever seen. But they trusted me, and off we went. It's been a huge success.
So let's unpack that a little bit further, because this is a wonderful example of not only having to tell a news story within the organization, but then also reach a new audience. So let's look at them separately. Let's start with the board. How did you prepare and present that in a way that if they've not encountered TikTok before, how did you make this accessible to them?
Sure. It was part of my larger overall strategy, which is I had laid out a house of brands and said, here's the role of each brand in our house of brands and how we're going to go attack the marketplace with unique and differentiated products, because one of our issues was our products had become too similar. So I laid the groundwork of the overall strategy and then showed this white space and our ability to move quickly. And from a business perspective, that was a pretty easy sell in for them. And then they just had to trust on the creative. And that's what I do. I'm the
right. Right. But
so
at the same time, the question of what is TikTok and do people make purchasing decisions based off of it is a hurdle for some people, because if they haven't made purchasing decisions based off of other social media, then you've got to leap to TikTok in that format.
That's right. Yeah. And so I did explain to them who's on TikTok and what it means and how it's one of the fastest growing platforms. And they were like, well, I don't understand how a bed would integrate into TikTok. And we had a great advertising agency, the Burns Group, which we are still engaged with on Simmons. And they came up with Snoozapalooza. So it was.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, and it was very culturally relevant because all of the concerts have been canceled, and basically all of the outings and events that young people do have been canceled. So we said, we know your year's been canceled, but you can join Snoozapalooza. And so the idea was you fall down backwards onto your bed, and then you make a TikTok about being at a concert or doing something fun. And it generated 5 billion impressions. We had set a target for 1 billion, and this thing just exploded.
Well, and you mentioned doing research and market research on that and looking at that first-time consumer for a bed. Talk to me about the research capability that you deployed for that, as well as what sort of questions you went in. How did you identify the market first, and then what did you do to investigate?
We did a consumer segmentation study, and then I had the researchers make sure to recruit enough people that were in Gen Z, which was a tougher recruit, to make sure that we got a splice of them. So that's how I knew we were the first one to market with this, we were quite early on, and we really did a lot of work to grab that. So the segmentation work was the first huge body of work that helped us. And then after that, we engaged with some other studies like Y Pulse and a few others that are really tapped into the younger generation. And then from there, we actually took some of our creative and our concepts and just put it in front of focus groups of young people and make sure, are we trying too hard? Like, is this actually cool and fun, or does it look like we're trying too
Is it going to resonate, or is it going to look too mom and dad like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that stands out from this example is you've got to reach your audience where they already consume content rather than where you're comfortable creating it and delivering it. And sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone because the audience has shifted or you're trying to reach a new audience. Has that been something you've seen in the past, or do you have other examples of that you can share from your career?
Oh, yes. So that I firmly believe in a couple things. One of them is that the quality of your creative drives your ROI. So creative effectiveness is most important. So I spend a lot of time with my teams making sure that we hit certain metrics in ad testing. Do they remember the brand? Did it break through? If it didn't break through, nobody watched it. So then it doesn't matter if brand recall is any good. And were they able to take away the key message? So we focused in on those pieces. Then the next thing we take a look at is based on the audience we're targeting, where are they? And this is the second thing that's a big pillar of mine is create advertising that's culturally relevant and put it in places where your audience is at. And it can't look like you jammed it in there. It actually has to fit with what's happening, which is why TikTok and Snoozapalooza was perfect. But it took a lot of work to make sure that we were fitting into the right channels.
And I think one of the things is the ability to morph a conversation. So the conversation that you have, whether with your peers on the senior leadership team or within the organization, the story that you're telling there needs to be crafted for them. And then you have to craft another story as well, but it has to be built off the same backbone,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's
And
correct.
so it's always about connecting with your audience from common points. If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. Now, you also talked about measurement and measuring success there. And I know you've been doing some work there. You want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, and that can be hard for marketers in general because sometimes the metrics we use aren't always recognized as easy to understand when you walk into a boardroom. So some of your peers have an easier time because the CFO can talk about, did we deliver the revenue and the profit or did we not? And it's pretty clear cut. For marketing people, it's really important to walk in and have your metrics and have metrics that you can tie back to some type of results. And so we've done a lot of work at Serta Simmons Betting around strategy deployment. So this year, actually just a couple of weeks ago, we rolled out a new strategy across the whole company and then have had a very focused effort on strategy deployment. And if you study any of the companies that are in the Good to Great book or other places, a couple of things are always true. They were focused, they had a plan, and then they measured against their plan to make sure they were tracking. So it's really important. It's also a discipline that I would say was on the weaker side at Serta Simmons Betting. So it's been great to work with our CEO, Dave Swift, who really, really, really believes in this.
Now, you've mentioned that you're a pretty passionate reader and consumer of information yourself. And so, talk to me a little bit about that as to how that fits into your role and what you do for sense making, right? Because you're often reaching out and looking for information. How do you, because there's not a scarcity of information. Where do you go? How do you sort through information? What are you looking for?
My process has been a lot about what a challenge am I facing at work this week, this month, this year, and then trying to fill in those educational gaps that I might have. So maybe it's I need to be more influential, and so then I will look for something that would guide me towards how am I more influential in the boardroom. Or lately, we've been really focused on metrics that matter. So I've been kind of in a wormhole, if you will, to use a younger person's term,
Mhm.
digging through, reading books around measurement and how people execute. And what I find is that often I'll leave a book with 2 or 3 things that I'm like, yep, I can absolutely improve my performance and the team's performance by integrating this into what we do.
So, where does the, because you talked about the research side of sort of Simmons, where does thought leadership and the deployment of thought leadership fit within the organization? How do ideas flourish within the organization as well as then get out? So, you talked about the history of innovation. How are those ideas being nurtured and shared?
Yeah, I mean, on innovation specifically, we have a group of people working on it, but we're always looking for inspiration internally and externally. So the way that we're trying to nurture ideas is we're trying to remove the hierarchical piece there, that ideas can come from anyone. And it's actually something that Dave Swift again had pushed me on as a leader. He said, "How are you creating a culture, Melanie, across the entire organization that anyone can feel free to reach out to you or others with ideas on products?" And while I was reading this weekend, I read a story about the man that introduced the flaming hot Cheetos. He was actually the janitor at Frito-Lay. And
Oh,
he
wow.
walked, yeah, it's a really great story. So he walks into the CEO's office. He's a janitor. The CEO was kind enough to listen. And he said, "You're missing a huge addressable market of Hispanics and Latinos by not having a really spicy Cheeto." And he had even made some. And he's the vice president now of
Oh,
Flaming
wow.
Hot Cheetos, I believe. And that is the culture we need. So a couple ways to build that is one, for people to realize that you're going to listen, to try to be an accessible leader. And I think that's something I've done pretty well, is be an accessible leader. But now there's a new frontier in front of us, which is how do we get people thinking about ideas constantly so that more of them bubble up? And that's something we're trying to do, especially with our younger people, because I think there's a lot of great ideas in there, but sometimes they're a little shy to share with us.
Well, and one of the things that I've seen in the thought leadership function is the desire to curate ideas, right?
Mhm.
And to help nurture them across the organization. That great ideas don't have to come from the top of the house. They don't have to be done in product research and offsite. Sometimes, like the example you gave for Cheetos, someone within the organization, could be the janitor, quite literally, walks in and says, "I have an idea."
Mhm.
And making the process of owning ideas and getting them to market part of everyone's responsibility,
Yeah.
regardless of whether they're creating it, curating it, or deploying it. But how do you take good ideas to market really becomes a new way of thinking about roles within the organization.
Yes, it does. It actually makes me think, we have an innovation that came to market this past year. It's called the Serta Easy Tote. An Easy Tote is it's a mattress in a box, but a mattress in a box is usually 48 inches tall, so about 4 feet.
Mhm.
It's quite tall. The Easy Tote, same exact mattress, is in a box that's 2 feet tall.
Right.
And this offers so many benefits. It's easier to put in your shopping cart. It's easier to put in your car. For the retailer, it obviously provides a lot more space on the shelf. They can get more products out there. And this idea came from engineering. And I saw it, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we need that. We need that right now." The minute I saw it, and that was fun. And I think that also kind of helped build this culture we're talking about. Is when people see that an idea can come from anywhere and actually gets executed, it builds a lot more confidence in the fact that you're going to do something with the idea.
So, how are you finding those ideas within the organization? You mentioned you saw it from engineering. But is that serendipity, or is it sort of part of a planned activity that you're looking across the organization for ideas?
That one was probably serendipity, just because the engineers which they're not in the innovation team at our company,
Mhm.
were were exposed to something and brought it over. Maybe a better example is, we've had some people outside of marketing, innovation, and engineering come forward with different ideas on things we could use, and we haven't implemented all of those. But I'm trying to create a culture where we get a better access to those ideas. So it's something that we're going to be looking at as we move into 2021, which is, not an idea box, but the idea of something like that, some type of opportunity for people to have a voice.
So let me tie two topics that we've talked about: metrics and the flow of ideas.
Mhm.
How would you measure that? So you talked about the idea box. How do you measure the flow of ideas across the organization to make sure that the good ones are being captured?
Right now we're taking a look at our innovation funnel and we look at how many ideas are in the first stage, which we call stage 0. And
Mhm.
we measure that every single month to make sure that not only do we have a lot of ideas up at the top of the funnel, but then also we have a good flow through the funnel, that we have a good amount of launch, as well as, at different stages, there's plenty of product coming in for us to commercialize. But I think the real opportunity is how do we get even more ideas in the funnel up at the top? We did a session last year where we had 60 people in a room and we just gave them a bunch of questions and a piece of white paper and some colored pencils. And I ended up with a stack of like 300 new ideas on products we could build. And we actually took a couple of them and moved them forward. But the head of innovation and I were talking yesterday and we said, we got to go through that pile of papers again. I bet there's some great stuff in there that at the time maybe we weren't ready for, but now we're ready.
Well, and that's one thing that I see is ideas often sit in an attic, and sometimes it's a physical attic where
Yeah.
there are things that were used before then get put away. But often it's, like you said, slips of paper or a file on a shared drive
Mm-hmm.
that people look at and they go back to. And it's useful to revisit those because they may now be relevant, like you said, in a different context. Either the organization is more prepared to work with the idea, the market has evolved, or there's a need for solving a new problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like COVID. So a couple weeks into the quarantine, a company we had met with in Europe, actually, I saw them on LinkedIn and they were talking about an antiviral mask. I was like, oh my gosh, what it would be so amazing if we could make an antiviral mattress. And so we called them up and we established an exclusive partnership with a company called Huet. And we're in the process of bringing the first ever antiviral mattress to market in the United States. So it's on its way right now, and we're working closely with the EPA. In fact, we're setting the protocol for the testing that's required to get the antiviral claim. And so we hope to be in market with this March or April, again, with the necessary approvals from the EPA. But it was one of those moments where we saw an unmet consumer need that didn't exist before. And then we looked to capitalize on it.
Well, and this is a great example. We've heard in 2020 the stories of the speed of research that has been
Mhm.
done for like a vaccine.
Right.
But I think, like you mentioned, the antiviral bed, where if you asked people in 2019 if they wanted it, thought it was important or a value, it would have
Yeah.
been way down on everybody's list. And they
Yeah.
go, why are you even asking the question? Now it's people have changed perspectives and the speed to market on something like that, that it can be done in a year to make a claim. And are you is it FDA that you have to go through for that claim or
EPA.
EPA? Sorry, I
Yeah.
misheard. Yeah. Yeah, it becomes a question of how quickly, when there's a need, can you bring an idea to market? And is that measured in weeks, months, years, or as I've heard in some organizations, yeah, ideas, we've got plenty of them. They never go anywhere. They just
Yeah.
stagnate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This has been a fun one. It was exhilarating. It was hair on fire, figure this out, get it on these products. How does it work? And it's been a tremendous opportunity. And specifically because we're the number one supplier to hospitality. So
Hmm.
you're most likely sleeping on a Serta or Simmons bed when you go to a hotel, at least one of the major chains. And of course, with all of their work around safety and cleanliness, they were very excited. When are you going to have it? When are you going to have it? When can we put this in our rooms? Because again, it helps reinsure the safety of the individuals that are traveling. And when you think about, just the sheer number of people moving through a hotel system, and this type of product lasts for 3 years, so it's a long time of helping all of us to stay healthier.
Well, and you and I are both road warriors and have
Right.
been, right? So it's a case where we're used to rolling into the hotel and going, okay, I just want a clean bed to sleep on, no noise outside. But knowing that the bed is one of the essential functions of when you're rolling into that hotel. Tell me a little bit about that process on collaboration. Did it turn in from a could we to, okay, we need to do this? Why can't we get it done? How did the cadence change on development?
Really, the tone we set from day one is we will do this and we will go as fast as we can, and this is going to happen. There was no that was the mindset that
Mhm.
there's no failure here, because if we hit a dead end somewhere, we're just going to keep working until we figure this out.
And was that culturally different on product development than the past? And if so, how?
A couple things. One is normally we wouldn't grab an idea and a day later work on
Right.
tell the whole company to work on it, which is what we
Mhm.
did. So
Almost
that was,
becoming a moonshot overnight, right?
yeah. And so we've talked a lot, and you and I can talk about this in a minute, but we've talked a lot about how do you keep that energy and that mindset going post COVID. But we literally said, number one project, stop what you're doing. We're doing this one. And so we had everybody switch over to this, and there were some technical challenges, but we worked through them pretty quickly because it was in the advantage of ourselves as well as our partner HiQ to get this thing done ASAP. So speed, much faster speed. We skipped some steps. I think sometimes that's helpful. And then it was a full new system for some of our suppliers, and so we also had to work with them on speed and agility of, okay, we need you to move. If you want this significant amount of volume, you got to jump. And all of them jumped.
So you teed up a question and I will take advantage of it. How do you keep that energy and that sort of dynamic, gotta get to market fast and the innovation and ideas and problem solving post COVID?
That has been the number one thing that I have been reflecting on over this week off from work is how do we embed that in our culture without being so disruptive that people feel like they're working in chaos? Because
Yeah, because that'd be turbulent, right?
yeah, you do need structure and you do need process, and it scares people if they think the next day you're going to walk in and change everything they're working on, and you can't do that all the time. But what I think you can do is take this mindset of when we see a great idea, we are going to prioritize it above other things. And also we had set up what we called a tiger team. So we didn't put everybody on the project. We put a small amount of people on the project. And then we let them know that they had the full support of the executive leadership team, that basically if you run into some type of hurdle, we're going to help you jump over it. You just have to raise your hand. And so I think that that's the piece that I want to keep. And then it's back to our earlier part of the conversation. How do you get those creative ideas coming in from lots of people in the organization, though, so you can jump on them?
Well, and this was a case where the need was clear. You encountered the technology and said, oh, we could take this, have a partner, and we can create this, right? And I think one of the challenges post COVID is we get back to a situation where the opportunities are still many, and you have to do that filtering process on which ones are going to be the ones that need the tiger team,
Yeah,
which ideas really deserve that fast track work where it's okay to skip a few steps because the idea is so strong.
that's right.
So before we wrap up, Mela, any suggestions or recommendations that you have for your peers as they're working on bringing ideas into the world and to the market?
Well, I did an interview slash talk about 6 months ago, and the theme was rip up the plan. and
Mm-hmm.
and I
As
think
many
that,
people were saying back in spring of 2020. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say that that's still the case, and it's not so much about ripping it up, but all plans need to be really agile and flexible right now. And so my advice to myself and to others is, as you enter the season of 2021, yes, we have goals and plans, but I think this idea of every month relooking at your plan and trying to make sure you're still on the right track is really important, because consumer behavior is shifting rapidly. We have no idea where that's headed. We have a guess, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
really know what's in front of us because it's a very unpredictable marketplace right now. So that flexibility is going to be key, and it is going to separate the winners from the losers.
I think that's a critical point. The annual planning or semi-annual planning has been put to the side this
Mhm.
year, and it's been much more, what do we need to get done right now? And there's a balance between the two. It's good to look over the horizon, but it's also good to say, are we still on course for something that people care about? Because the sand can shift underneath our feet very quickly.
Absolutely, it's fun if you're ready, if you're thinking about it. It's not so fun if the quicksand has sucked you down in there and you're like, oh no, now
Yeah,
what?
if you're buried waist deep, there's no digging out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, thank you very much for joining us today, and best wishes to you in the new year.
Oh, thank you. This was so much fun. I appreciate you taking time and allowing me to be on your show. It was great.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please join our LinkedIn group, Organizational Thought Leadership. It's a professional community where thought leadership practitioners talk shop about our field. So if you're someone who creates, curates, or deploys thought leadership for your organization, then please join the conversation in the Organizational Thought Leadership LinkedIn